Hi, my name's Carson, a guest star here at Cornhole Videos. As y'all might know, I'm quite a fan of reading. Reading is a good skill to learn, unlike calculus. You'll actually carry it further in life. I'm a big fan of this author right here, Robert E. Howard. My birthday's coming up, and I'm fortunate enough to share a birthday with this man. I also share a birthday with Adam's dad. He was a good fella. I want to take you back to a time where men had barrel chests and broadswords and women had heaving bosoms and birthing hips. It's a mighty fine time to be alive, and the story I'm going to read for you today is a story called The Screaming Skull of Silence, which to my knowledge, unlike most of other stories from this fella, is not on YouTube in any form, which means you can only hear it here. Robert E. Howard was a good fella. He lived in the 30s, in the Great Depression, and he sold stories. He get paid for writing stories, so that he could stretch out a yarn real good. He'd give all the money towards his mother's medical treatments, and then she died. And it was sad. And then he killed himself, which was also sad. Suicide is not good. That being said, he was a fantastic author. Good dude. Favorite author of all time. Let's listen to this story right here.
The Screaming Skull of Silence. Taken from Kull, Exile of Atlantis, by Robert E. Howard. Men still name it the Day of the King's Fear, for Kull, King of Valusia, was only a man after all. There was never a bolder man, but all things have their limits, even courage. Of course Kull had known apprehension and cold whispers of dread, sudden starts of horror, and even the shadow of unknown terror. But these had been but starts and leapings in the shadows of the mind, caused mainly by surprise or some loathsome mystery or unnatural thing, more repugnance than real fear. So real fear in him was so rare a thing that men marked the day. Yet there was a time that Kull knew fear, stark, terrible, and unreasoning, and his marrow weakened and his blood ran cold. So men speak of the time of Kull's fear, and they do not speak in scorn, nor does Kull feel any shame. No, for as it came about the thing that rebounded to his undying glory. Thus it came to be. Kull sat at ease on the throne of society, listening idly to the conversation of two chief counselors, Kanu, ambassador from Pictum, Brule, Kanu's right-hand man, and Cthulhos, the slave, who was yet the greatest scholar in the Seven Kingdoms. "All is illusion," Cthulhos was saying. "All outward manifestations of the underlying reality, which is beyond human comprehension. Since there are no relative things by which the finite mind may measure the infinite, the one may underlie all, or each natural illusion may possess a basic entity. All these things are known to Rama, the greatest mind of all the ages, who aeons ago freed humanity from the grasp of unknown demons and raised the race to its heights." "He was a mighty necromancer," said Kanu. "He was no wizard," said Cthulhos. "No chanting, mumbling conjurer divining from snakes' livers. There was naught of mummery about Rama. He had grasped the first principles. He knew the elements, and he understood natural forces, acted upon by natural causes, producing natural results. He accomplished his apparent miracles by the exercise of his powers in natural ways, which were as simple in their manners to him as lighting a fire is to us, and as much beyond our ken as our fire would have been to our ape ancestors." "Then why did he not give all his secrets to the race?" asked two. "He knew it is not good for man to know too much. Some villain would subjugate the whole race, nay, the whole universe, if he knew as much as Rama knew. Man must learn by himself and expand in soul as he learns." "Yet, you say all is illusion," persisted Kanu. shrewd in statecraft, but ignorant in philosophy and science, and respecting Cthulhu's for his knowledge. How is that? Do we not hear and see and feel? What is sight and sound? Countered the slave. Is not sound absence of silence, and silence absence of sound? The absence of a thing is not material substance. It is nothing. And how can nothing exist? Then why are things? Asked Kanu, like a puzzled child. They are appearances of reality, like science. Somewhere exists the essence of silence, the soul of silence, nothing that is something, an absence so absolute that it takes material form. How many of you ever heard complete silence? None of us. Always there are some noises, the whisper of the wind, the flutter of an insect, even the growing of the grass, or on the desert, the murmur of the sands. But at the center of silence there is no sound. Rama, said Kanu, long ago shut a spectre of silence into a great castle, and sealed him there for all time. Aye, said Brule, I have seen the castle. A great black thing on a lone hill in the wild region of Volusia. Since time immemorial, it has been known as the Skull of Silence. Ha! Kull was interested now. My friends, I would like to look upon this thing. Lord King, said Cthulhu's, it is not good to tamper with what Rama made fast, for he was wiser than any man. I have heard the legend that by his arts he imprisoned a demon. Not by his arts, say I, but by his knowledge of the natural forces, and not a demon, but some element which threatened the existence of the race. The might of that element is evinced by the fact that not even Rama was able to destroy it. He only imprisoned it. Enough, Kull gestured impatiently. Rama has been dead so many thousands of years that it wearies me to think on it. I ride to find the Skull of Silence. Who rides with me? All of those who listened to him, and 100 of the Red Slayers, Volusia's mightiest war force, rode with Kull when he swept out of the royal city in the early dawn. They rode up among the mountains of Zalgara, and after many days' search they came upon a lone hill rising somberly from the surrounding plateaus, and on its summit a great stark castle black as doom. There is the place. No people live within 100 miles of this castle, nor have they in the memory of man. It is shunned like a region accursed. Kull reined his great stallion to a halt and gazed. No one spoke, and Kull was aware of the strange, almost intolerable stillness. When he spoke again, everyone started. To the king it seemed that waves of deadening quiet emanated from that brooding castle on the hill. No birds sang in the surrounding land, and no wind moved the branches of stunted trees as Kull's horsemen rode up the slope. Their footfalls on the rocks seemed to tinkle drearily and far away, dying without echo. They halted before the castle that crouched there like a dark monster, and Cthulhu again essayed to argue with the king. Kull, consider! If you burst that seal you may loose upon the world a monster whose might and frenzy no man can stay. Kull, impatient of restraint, waved him aside. He was in the grip of a wayward perverseness, a common fault of kings. And though usually reasonable, he had now made up his mind and was not to be swerved from his course. There are ancient writings on the seal, Cthulhu, he said. Read them to me. Cthulhu unwillingly dismounted, and the rest followed suit, all save the common soldiers who sat their horses like bronze images in the pale sunlight. The castle leered at them like a sightless skull, for there were no windows whatever, and only one great door, that of iron, and bolted and sealed. Apparently the building was all in one chamber. Kull gave a few orders as to the disposition of troops, and was irritated when he found that he was forced to raise his voice unseemingly in order for the commanders to understand him. Their answers came dimly and indistinctly. He approached the door, followed by his 4 comrades. There, on a frame beside the door, hung a curious-appearing gong, apparently of jade, a sort of green in shade. But Kull could not be sure of the color, for to his amazed stare it changed and shifted, and sometimes his gaze seemed to be drawn into great depths, and sometimes to glance extreme shallowness. Beside the gong hung a mallet of the same strange material. He struck it lightly and then gasped, nearly stunned by the crash of sound which followed. It was like all earth noises concentrated. "Read the writings, Cthulhos," he commanded again, and the slave bent forward in considerable awe, for no doubt these words had been carved by the great Rama himself. "That which may be again," he intoned. "Then beware, all sons of men." He straightened, a look of fright on his face. A warning straight from Rama! Mark ye, Kull, mark ye!" Kull snorted, and drawing his sword, rent the seal from its hold and cut through the great metal bolt. He struck again and again, being aware of the comparative silence with which the blows fell. The bars fell, the door swung open. Cthulhu screamed, Kull reeled, stared. The chamber was empty. No, he saw nothing. There was nothing to see. Yet he felt the air throb about him as something came billowing from that foul chamber in great unseen waves. Cthulhu leaned to his shoulder and shrieked, and his words came faintly as from over cosmic distance. "The silence! This is the soul of all silence!" Sound ceased. Horses plunged, and their riders fell face first into the dust, and lay clutching at their heads with their hands, screaming without sound. Kull alone stood erect, his futile sword thrust in front of him. Silence, utter and absolute, throbbing, billowing waves of still horror. Men opened their mouths and shrieked, but there was no sound. The silence entered Kull's soul. It clawed at his heart. It sent tentacles of steel into his brain. He clutched at his forehead in torment. His skull was bursting, shattering in the wave of horror which engulfed him. Kull saw red in colossal visions, the silence spreading out over Earth, over the universe. Men died in gibbering stillness, the roar of rivers, the crash of seas, the noise of winds faltered and ceased to be. All sound was drowned by the silence. Silence, soul-destroying, brain-shattering, blotting out all life on Earth and reaching monstrously up into the skies, crushing the very singing of the stars. And then Kull knew fear, horror, terror, overwhelmingly grisly, soul-killing. Faced by the ghastliness of his vision, he swayed and staggered drunkenly, gone wild with fear. Oh gods, for a sound, the very slightest, faintest noise! Kull opened his mouth like the growling maniacs behind him, and his heart nearly burst from his breast in his effort to shriek. The throbbing stillness mocked him. He smote against the metal sill with his sword, and still the billowing waves flowed from the chamber, clawing at him, tearing at him, taunting him like a being sensate with terrible life. Kanu and Cthulhu lay motionless. Two writhed on his belly, his head in his hands, and squalled soundlessly like a dying jackal. Brule wallowed in the dust like a wounded wolf, clawing blindly at his scabbard. Kull could almost see the form of the silence now, the frightful silence that was coming out of its skull at last, to burst the skulls of men. It twisted, it writhed in unholy wisps and shadows. It laughed at him. It lived. Kull staggered and toppled, and as he did, his outflung arm struck the gong. Kull heard no sound, but he felt a distinct throb and jerk of the waves about him, a slight withdrawal, involuntary, just as a man's hand jerks back from the flame. Ah, old Rama left a safeguard for the race, even in death. Kull's dizzy brain suddenly read the riddle. The sea! The gong was like the sea, changing green shades, never still, now deep and now shallow, never silent. The sea, vibrating, pulsing, booming, day and night, the greatest enemy of silence. Reeling, dizzy, nauseated, he caught up the jade mallet. His knees gave way, but he clung with one hand to the frame, clutching the mallet with the other. In a desperate death grip, the silence surged wrathfully about him. "Mortal! Who are you to oppose me who am older than the gods? before life was I, and shall be when life dies. Before the invader's sound was born, the universe was silent and shall be again, for I shall spread out through all the cosmos and kill sound. The roar of silence reverberated through the caverns of Kull's crumbling brain in abysmal chanting monotones as he struck on the gong again and again. And at each blow the silence gave back, inch by inch. Back and back, Kull renewed the force of his mallet blows. Now he could faintly hear the faraway tinkle of the gong over unthinkable voids of stillness, as if someone on the other side of the universe were striking a silver coin with a horseshoe tail. At each tiny vibration of noise, the wavering silence started and shuddered, the tentacles shortened, the waves contracted, the silence shrank. Back and back. Now the wisps hovered in the doorway, and behind Kull, men whimpered and wallowed to their knees, chins sagging and eyes vacant. Kull tore the gong from its frame and reeled toward the door. He was a finish fighter. No compromise for him. There would be no bolting the great door upon the horror again. The whole universe should have halted to watch a man justifying the existence of mankind, scaling sublime heights of glory in his supreme atonement. He stood in the doorway and leaned against the waves that hung there, hammering ceaselessly. All hell flowed out to meet him from the fright thing whose very last stronghold he was invading. All of silence was now in the chamber again, forced back by the unconquerable crashings of sound, sound concentrated from all the sounds and noises of earth, and imprisoned by the master hand that long ago conquered both sound and silence. And here, silence gathered all its forces for one last attack. Hells of soundless cold and noiseless flame whirled about Kull. Here was a thing elemental and real. Silence, the absence of sound, Cthulhu's had said. Cthulhu's who now groveled and yammered empty nothingness. Here was more than an absence whose utter absence became a presence, an abstract illusion that was a material reality. Kull reeled, blind, stunned, numb, almost insensible from the onslaught of cosmic forces upon him. Soul, body, and mind cloaked by the whirling tentacles. The noise of the gong died out again, but Kull never ceased. His tortured brain rocked by the thrusts, his feet against the sill, and shoved powerfully forward. He encountered material resistance, like a wall of solid fire, hotter than flame and colder than ice. Still he plunged forward and felt it give and give, step by step. Foot by foot he fought his way into the chamber of death, driving the silence before him. Every step was screaming demoniac torture. Every foot was ravaging hell. Shoulders hunched, head down, arms raising and falling in jerky rhythm, Kull forced his way, and great drops of blood gathered on his brow and dropped unceasingly. Behind him men were beginning to stagger up, weak and dizzy from the silence that had invaded their brains. They gaped at the door where the king fought his deathly battle for the universe. Brule crawled blindly forward, trailing his sword, still dazed and only following his stunned instinct, which bade him follow the king through the trail led to hell. Kull forced the silence back, step by step, feeling it growing weaker and weaker, feeling it dwindling, and now the sound of the gong pealed out and grew and grew. It filled the room, the earth and the sky. The silence cringed before it, and as the silence dwindled and was forced into itself, it took hideous form that Kull saw yet did not see. His arms seemed dead, but with a mighty effort he increased his blows. Now the silence writhed in the dark corner and shrunk again. Again, a last blow. All the sound in the universe rushed together in one roaring, yelling, shattering, engulfing burst of sound. The gong blew into a million vibrating fragments, and silence screamed. Monkey.
Thanks for listening to this story with us. It's been a real fun time. Robert Howard's a good author. If you like reading, he wrote just about any genre. Reading is good.
Hold the book higher.
Reading is good.
Reading is good.
It's not like calculus. You'll actually use reading throughout your life. Unlike calculus. There's a reason why people hate math and love reading. I'm Carson McKinnish, and I work for a living.